Hey gang, welcome to week 4 of Code Club Year 2. This week we're going to learn how to make it so our hero can jump across the platform and how to add sounds to our game. Open up another browser window and log on to Cloud9 so that you can follow along. Have fun and let's start coding. When we left off last week, our hero could move left and right, but he still moved right through platforms and he couldn't jump yet. So this week we'll add the ability for our hero to jump around on platforms. We need to do this by adding gravity to our world, which is also handled by the Phaser.io physics engine. Gravity is something that we turn on for the entire game world, but we can actually turn it off per sprite because gravity doesn't need to apply to everything. Our hero needs gravity because he jumps around. Platforms don't really need gravity because they don't move, and if we turn gravity on, it would actually make them fall off the screen, which we don't want them to do. Adding gravity to your game is something that could happen at several different spots in the code. It could be in the init, or in the create, or in the preload. For this project, we're going to do it at the bottom of load level, which is called from create. And this is the code that adds gravity to your game. So there's a line that sets how high the gravity should be, and then there's another line that says on the Y direction, which is up and down, the gravity should be set to whatever value we want. The reason we're doing it in load level is because that'll allow us to add some cool features in the future where, for example, if we want level 1 to be on Earth with normal gravity, and then we want level 2 to be on the moon with very little gravity, so it's way easier to jump, and then level 3 could be on Jupiter, which has real high gravity, so it would be harder to jump. The reason it makes sense to do that in load level is because then we could add to our JSON data a value for the gravity. So instead of saying const gravity here, we would just use data that we pulled out of our JSON file to set how high the gravity would be for a level. If we save our game and reload our preview window at this point, the hero just falls down to the bottom of the window. This is because the hero and the platforms don't know how to interact with each other yet, because heroes have game physics turned on, but platforms don't. So we need to add game physics to platforms so that they can interact with the hero. In order to make turning on physics for the platforms easier, we're going to add all the platforms to what's called a group in Phaser.io. And a group allows us to perform operations on everything in the group instead of doing it one at a time. In our case, we'll have the hero collide with the group of platforms instead of having to turn on physics for each individual platform and having the hero collide with each individual platform. So the first thing we need to do is create a group, and we'll do this in load level right before we load up the platforms. We're saying platforms is a group. We're adding a group to the game called platforms. Now we need to change the spawn platform function so that instead of creating each platform separately, it creates them as part of a Phaser.io group. And what we need to do is erase this entire line of code and then put these 4 new lines of code in there. It's okay to do a replacement of code like this. Having to iteratively change your code as you figure out how you want things to work is a big part of computer programming. You need to be flexible when you're a computer programmer. This code creates new platforms as part of that platforms group. It also enables game physics for the platforms and then disables gravity and makes sure that the platforms are not movable. So that's what these 2 lines of code are for. They say, allow gravity false, immovable true. So turn off gravity, make the platform immovable. If we didn't do this, I'm going to show you this real quick because it's kind of a funny example. If we didn't do these 2 lines of code and we saved, we went back here, all of our platforms fall off the screen, and we definitely don't want that. So let me put these 2 lines of code back in. I'll save again. Now if we go back, now only our hero falls because while our platforms have gravity, we still haven't told the game what to do when our hero and our platform interact with each other. Now we can actually add the code that makes the hero and the platforms interact. We need to go back to the code here. And the first thing we need to do is at the beginning of the update function, we're going to make it call a new function called handle collisions. And that's where we're going to have all of the code that does collision detection between the different types of objects in our game. Just like handle input, handle collisions is a function that doesn't exist in our game yet. So we need to scroll down to the bottom and add it to our game. So we're saying handle collisions will do this line of code. And This is the easiest type of collision function they have in Phaser, and it basically says collide, and then you tell it which two objects you want to collide, which are heroes and platforms. And if you notice, we're saying this dot hero, and that is the one hero that we created in our game. We're also saying this dot platforms, which means anytime you see any of the platforms in our platforms groups, do the collision. And this type of collision, where it just says collide, is a stop collision. So if a hero collides with any of the platforms, the hero or the platform are going to stop. But because our platforms can't move, it just means that the hero is going to stop if it hits into them. If we save and reload now, when our hero moves into this platform, he's going to stop. That's exactly what we want. Now we need to add code so that he can jump over the platforms and jump from one platform to the next. If we switch back to the code, we need to figure out how to make the game know when we want our hero to jump. And the easiest thing to do is we'll add a new key mapping that says when somebody hits the up arrow on their keyboard, we want the hero to jump. So we'll scroll back up to the init function where we're saying the left key and the right key are keys that we want to use. Now we need to add a new one for the up key. And it's very important. We're going to add it after the right line. We need to add a comma at the end of the right line, and then we can add the code that says we also want the up key. If you remember, when we added the left and right keys, we added a handle input function that tested if left was pressed down or if right was pressed down or if neither of them were pressed down. We're going to do this a little bit differently with the up key. Instead, we're going to have Phaser listen for a signal that the up key has been pressed. This is done using a feature of Phaser called signaling. To get it to work, we need to add a new function that is called an event handler, and it's whether the key up has been pushed down or not. And if Phaser hears that, something will happen. And there's a lot of technical mumbo-jumbo terminology around this, subscribing, binding, callbacks. You don't need to know too much about that stuff, so don't worry about it. Just know that we're using Phaser signals to check for an event to happen, and the event is the up key being pressed. Just like with our other keyboard handling code, we're going to add the key up event handler function to the bottom of the init function. The key up event handler calls a hero jump function, which doesn't exist yet, so we need to create that. Just like the move function, we need to make sure that we create it after the hero prototype object creation. So we're going to add it down after the hero move function that we added. We're going to add a new jump function. The way the jump function works is that first it checks this body.touching down. And what that says is the bottom of the hero object touching something? Is it touching something else that has physics enabled? For us, that's going to mean, is it touching a platform? And that's going to tell whether he can jump or not. And the answer is, if it is touching something, yes, he can jump. If he is not touching something, he cannot jump. And this is what makes it so that you can't do like double, triple jumps like you can in some other games where if you hit the jump button 2 times in a row, it'll jump higher or something like that. Right now, we're not going to allow that in our game. He's only allowed to jump if his bottom is touching a platform. And he's going to jump at the speed that's indicated here. So right now, he's going to jump at 600. So if you look, the way we have him jump is we change his Y velocity, his up-down velocity, to the speed here. And it'll be that speed until he hits a platform or falls back down. Now, if we save and reload our game, our hero can move around. He can jump when I hit the up button. And if you look, he stops when he hits the platform ahead of him. Because the platforms interact, so I can jump on top of other platforms now. Not very well, but I can do it. So now the hero can jump around. One final thing before we finish this week off is, wouldn't it be cool if our hero made a noise when he jumped? Using Phaser, we can add sounds to our game that get played when an event happens. Just like with all of our other game assets, in the preload function, we need to load the wave file for our sound up into the game cache. And we do this the same exact way. Instead of saying load image, we say load audio. We give it the audio wave file that we're going to use, and we give it a name, which is sfx.jump. In order for us to be able to use the sound that we preloaded, we also need to create a reference to it in our game. And so the way we're going to do that is create a new group called SFX, and that's where all of our sounds are going to go. We're going to create one in it called Jump, and it's referenced to this preloaded audio file that we named sfx.jump. The last thing we need to do is tell our game that when the hero jumps, we want it to play the sound. And the way we do this is we're going to change the up event handler. Right now, all it's doing is saying, make the hero jump. What we want to do instead is say, make the hero jump, and then if the hero did jump, play a sound. And the way we do this, if we go and look up at the jump function, it's doing what's called returning a variable. And that variable is whether the hero was allowed to jump or not. Remember, he's only allowed to jump if he's touching a platform. So we're going to return whether he was allowed to jump or not. And then in our up event handler, we're going to say if the hero was allowed to jump, that means he did jump, and play the sound that goes along with that. And this all happens really super fast, so when you hit the up arrow, the hero will jump if he is allowed to, and it'll play the sound at the same time. This idea of returning information from a function to the function that called it, so we're returning the information of whether the hero was allowed to jump to the up event handler, which called this.hero.jump. That concept of returning information from a function to its caller is a very common practice in any programming language. If you want a real life type of example of that, let's say you have a complex task like making pizza, and you have a main chef and you have several, let's say 4 chefs who work for him. Well, you could have one person make the dough, one person cutting vegetables and meat for the toppings, one person cooking the sauce, and one person shredding the cheese. So the main function, the main chef, told these 4 other functions, the 4 sub-chefs, to do these other 4 tasks. When I'm done making the dough, and another person's done cutting the vegetables, another person's done cooking the sauce, and another person's done shredding the cheese, they return their work back to the main chef, and the main chef puts it all together to make a pizza. And that's just how returning information from a function to something else works in a computer programming environment. Now, if we reload our code, go back to the preview window, now when I have the character jump, a little sound plays. Next week, we're going to add some things for our hero to do. There'll be some coins that he'll be able to pick up, and we'll add enemies, although the hero won't interact with the enemies yet. We'll do that the week after next. Alright, that's it for week 4. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next week.